And if you have an empire that has that policy or mechanic of erasure, but at the same time expansion, which we know the Russian Empire is constantly expanding, and it has trouble delivering value from the territories that it expands into, but expands nonetheless. If you're going to define yourself in that space, on the edge of that, then you need something quite strong. I would almost call it nationalism. And of course, Russia uses the concept of nationalism in a very negative sense, and it has some negative connotations, parts in the West as well. But is there a real difference, and we discussed this in a previous conversation, is there a real difference between cultural nationalism and colonial nationalism, which sometimes kind of get confused together?
I don't think there is Russian nationalism in the kind of a classical sense of the term. I mean, there is Russian. Why? Because I don't think there is a Russian nation. Because a nation is a group of people that really has a certain connection, for example, with the locality, with the land, with something else. I do think that in Russia we have another syndrome, is that they built an empire before they built a nation, and then they kind of identified the nation with the empire. And then you ask a question, okay, but what is the real connection between, let's say, Slavic peoples and Ugrophin peoples and Mongolic peoples? And I think one of the fear of the Russians about Ukrainians is that if they cannot persuade Ukrainians that Ukrainians are Russians, how they will persuade Buryats that Buryats are Russians. And therefore, if you don't have this political space, the common political space, common values, the only thing, and you don't even have the common religion, because you have Buddhism, you have Islam, not only Christianity. The only thing that connects your people is language. And therefore, this is something that people in Western Europe really find it hard to understand. Why Ukrainians are so kind of so protective, so thinking deeply about the language. Why we consider that the Russian language is a threat? Because we don't consider Russian language is just one element in the plurality. We consider Russian language as an instrument to destroy plurality, and that's a big difference. It's a kind of the analogy between Western empires like British Empire or Belgian Empire or French Empire and the Russian Empire. There are many analogies, but there are differences, because when the British colonizer was coming to let's say India or Africa, the message was, you will never become the same as me. I'm higher than you because I have a different race. And this was this hierarchy of racism, etc. When the Russians are coming to the colonized people, their message is, you will never become different than me. You will always become the same. You will always be the same as me. So it's not the idea of difference and hierarchy and racism, which is a tool of domination, but the tool of domination is the idea of sameness. And how you ensure the idea of sameness? Again, erasing the memory, erasing the identity through language. The Russians are saying, if you forget your language, if you forget your culture, everything will be fine. You will become Russian. You will even rule Russia. We'll let you rule. I mean, we'll let you Ukrainians rule. We'll let you the Georgians rule. Whatever. The problem is that they are no longer Ukrainians and no longer Georgians and no longer whatever else. So I do think that this is important thing to understand, and therefore, for example, there is kind of this mindset. When I'm saying Russian, I don't really mean that it will be always like that. I'm just particularly meaning this certain political structure which was born, let's say, in 15th, 16th century. Because just imagine they started their statehood in about late 15th, early 16th century, and by the early 17th century, they were already reaching the Pacific. Can you imagine this drive of expansion? And they are afraid of losing that. And therefore, they are thinking that if they do not expand, they will narrow down, they will shrink. And therefore, they start these colonial wars over and over again. It's not only Ukraine, it's Syria, it's Georgia, and they're seriously thinking about attacking Europe. Europe is absolutely unprotected right now, especially if we see this turmoil with Trump and everything.